back if you have another comment. We're going to also talk about one other topic tonight, but thank you for calling.
Well, I got a client that's going to call you from Dallas or something.
Who is this? Who is this? Who are you?
This Joe Ballard.
Okay, nice to talk to you, Joe.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait for your number at the end of the screen.
Okay, or Google me, Vivian King. You can always Google me.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And if we don't have another call holding at this moment, we're going to turn our attention to Victoria, who's going to tell us about the Jonathan Ferrell case out of North Carolina.
Yes, thank you, Ms. King, for having me on your show.
Sure.
Jonathan Ferrell was a 24-year-old African-American male. He played football in Florida for University, A&M University, and he was in the process of moving to North Carolina. He was going to be married very soon. And Jonathan got in an accident, a car accident, earlier this month, and his car was damaged. He had to kick his way out of the window, out of his car. There was some reports, some speculation as to whether he had been possibly drinking before the accident, but no one else was injured in the crash. He started canvassing a nearby neighborhood to ask for help. He ends up knocking on the door of a house, and a Caucasian woman, opens the door. She initially thought it would be her husband. And when she realized it wasn't her husband, she slammed the door and called 911. If you listen to the 911 call, it's about 17 minutes long, and it took the police officers about 11 minutes to get to the scene. She's obviously upset and scared, I think probably rightfully so, not knowing exactly what's going on or what Jonathan's doing there. She's talking about trying to find her husband's gun. There's an alarm going off. There's dogs barking. In any event, the police arrive, and there are 3 officers, and one of those officers was named Officer Carrick, 27-year-old Caucasian male. And there seems to be some span of time between when they get there and when they actually encounter Jonathan, because you can hear her saying on the phone, they're leaving. The officers are leaving. Where are they going? And the operator is telling her, I'm sure they just see Jonathan. They're going to go find him. And long story short, Officer Carrick ends up shooting Jonathan 12 times. He fires 12 bullets. 10 of the bullets entered Jonathan's body. Jonathan was unarmed. I'd argue he may have been disoriented from his car accident.
And having to kick himself out of the car.
Exactly.
He couldn't get out.
One of the officers mentioned that he may have gone for his taser, but in any event, they didn't tase him. They shot him, and they killed him. And now the police officer has been charged with voluntary manslaughter. And the 2 other officers are not on active duty right now. That's the last that I read about it. I don't know if that will change, but it was just the one officer, Officer Carrick, that shot him. And, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And I don't mean to compare tragedies, but I think it's helpful to look at just a couple other of examples real quickly that have happened in just the last couple of years. One is from the state of California in 2009. A young man named Oscar Grant was shot at the Fruitvale BART station by a police officer. It was New Year's Day in the early morning hours, and there were 3 police officers involved. There were many African-American young males, I'd say about 4 or 5, their friends. They were detained and cuffed and on the ground sitting. The officers at one point restrained Oscar's hands behind his back and had him on his knees. They then, and there's video of this online, it's very clearly videotaped. There were multiple cell phones out by bystanders because it's a train station. And one of the officers named Meserly pulled out his gun and shot Oscar Grant in the back.
Wow.
The Alameda District Attorney's Office charged Officer Meserly with murder, which is interesting because Jonathan in North Carolina, the officer there was not charged with murder, and there have been many commentators that have said that he should have been. In any event, we have a little bit of hindsight with Oscar Grant's case because it did go to trial. Officer Meserly testified that he thought he was he went for his taser and he thought he had his taser out, but it was his weapon that fired and killed Oscar Grant. He died in the hospital the next morning. He was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, served 2 years in the Los Angeles County Jail in a private cell, and has since been released. So, you know,
and they've made a movie out of that. I've never seen it, but I've heard about it.
I haven't seen it.
There's a movie called Fruitvale Station, and it's about that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it's supposed to be one of those sleepers that might even be an Oscar nomination. I've never seen it because it was at small venues. But what is the third? We have a call. I'm scared to take it. Let's take this call right quick, and then you'll tell us about the other comparison,
Yes,
okay? Caller, you're on.
Oh, I had up Miss King.
Hey, Tracy.
Okay, it's like the phone, you know, it's some feedback. I got my TV already turned down.
Okay, you turned the TV down? Okay.
My TV turned down, but I still hear the feedback.
I know, I hear the feedback too. Renita, see if you can do something about that, because I hear the reverberation. Turn it down a little bit. Okay, come on. Okay, it's okay.
Okay. Is anything better now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you. We can hear you. You're very loud to us. It's just kind of muffled, but go ahead.
Okay. I want to talk to you about what we're talking about, the situation with the North Carolina situation.
Okay.
And I think that it's very unfortunate.
I agree with you, Tracy. That's awful. That could be. I have a daughter I just sent to college. I would be devastated if she had an accident and somebody killed her and the police killed her. I would be devastated. So, I mean, all I can do is just weep for that family. They were sending him to college. He was doing everything right.
Yeah, it's up like Trayvon Martin revisited.
It's just a shame that we're so afraid of black boys, and I'm like Victoria. I can understand if I open the door and it's not my husband and it's a teenage boy at the front door, black boy, white boy, it doesn't matter. If he's a teenage boy, I'm going to be scared and I'm going to close the door and I'm going to call the police. But I would never want the police to kill him. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's a burglar. I would just say it's some identified man at my door, or I might even close the door and ask the kid, "Can I help you?" But I'm not even sure I would call the police. I'm just telling you the truth. I think I would probably. I mean, if he didn't look like he had a gun or was trying to bust in when I opened the door, I think that I would just think that it was just somebody knocking on the door. Yeah. That's what I think I would do.
And I have done that.
But being so big and bulky, you're a football player. I just, I turn the TV off and I still hear it. You know? But anyway, but being so big and bulky, you know, the police officer might feel threatened. He might feel threatened.
What time of day or night was it? Do we know?
It was nighttime.
It was
2:30
nighttime.
in the morning.
So it's 2:30 in the morning. So that's scary. I mean, because women think we're going to get raped or whatever.
But that's why you call the police.
Right.
You call the police for cooler, calmer heads who are trained professionals to come out and find out what's really going on.
And
exactly.
So you don't have to go out there with a gun and do something wrong.
Right.
So we depend on, and that's what happens when you are a 27-year-old.
That is so smart. I mean, because if we go out there with a gun, we're going to shoot them. I mean, if you're a homeowner because you're scared. So like you said, you expect your police to be able to do that.
And that's why they have tasers. I mean, that's one of the reasons that police officers carry tasers. And I've actually seen someone tased at the courthouse in person.
Wow.
And I can tell you it will knock them to the ground and they will flail. This is one of those situations where I think, again, we see the police overusing force.
Plus, I bet that officer can't even articulate why he was scary to them. Yeah. You know, they didn't wait to investigate to see. They could have waited. Officers, to my knowledge, still have bullhorns. Even if it's dark and he's a dark-skinned man, they could still be saying, "Show me your hands. Is there an emergency?"
Right.
You know, because they still are in a car with guns, so they have the jump on them. Most people just don't start shooting at cops. Right. They usually run, if anything.
Well, and they shot 10 times.
I'm sorry. Coming out on the, you know, this is turn to, you know, well. I hate to even go there, but I think Belinda Hill was doing an excellent job. And, you know, I guess, you know, like I say, you know, just pass the torch.
Mm-hmm. And it's politics. And it's politics, and we've allowed our legislators to create a system of politics. And so we all have to learn politics. I mean, as us working in the criminal justice system, we've learned politics. I mean, we wanted to be lawyers. We didn't want to be politicians, but we've learned that politics rules, and it really doesn't matter if you're a good lawyer, bad lawyer, good leader, not a good leader, good administrator, good manager. That doesn't matter. It's who is popular in a party. And we have legislators who've created a system of election based on party. And some states aren't like that. I mean, we don't have to be that way. Again, that's why we need to be engaged and involved, and maybe the next group of young legislators can change that. But we can certainly vote.
I'm going to hang up. I'm going to watch the rest of the show because I missed on some of my recorded, but I step aside to, make sure I hear a little.
Okay, Tracy. Okay. Thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. All righty. So, Victoria, tell us, you gave us the comparison to Oscar Grant in California at Fruitvale Station, who was just murdered. Because I based on the way you educated us about it, if he was handcuffed and on the ground or had his hands behind his back, I just don't understand why he had to be shot at all.
Right.
And a lot of times what I find police officers do is they play with people with those tasers.
Yeah.
A lot of times they tase people that don't need to be tased.
Absolutely.
And what bothers me is if I'm in a stressful situation, and I know I'm not a trained policeman or I don't know how to work a gun, but how do you don't know if you're going for your taser or your gun? That's what scares me is that.
That's absolutely.
And that's what the experts at the trial said. Like, you can't confuse those two. And if you watch the video of him, he is like prone on the ground with his hands behind him. There's several cops, and the officer who's above him is just kind of kneeling on his back, and he just pulls his gun out and pop.
And
but why'd he do it?
You can't see struggling or anything. It's just
murder.
Well, there's never an excuse for that.
No, there's never.
Let's take another call. Caller, you're on. Thank you for calling. Truth and Justice with Vivian King.
Sorry, Victoria.
No call. Okay. They hung up. All right. Thank you, Victoria. What's the next one?
The last thing I'd like to say about the Oscar Grant case is because we were talking about training and, well, why did he do it? And there's actually the federal government, the Department of Justice, has opened an investigation, a civil rights investigation. There's no charges have been filed as of now. But I think it's interesting that we have sort of this overseeing by the federal government of it, like, hey, what is going on with this training and these officers? And the third example I had was a gentleman named Kenneth Chamberlain out of White Plains, New York, also an African-American male. This time he wasn't quite as young, though. He's 68 years old.
Wow.
Vietnam veteran. And he's in his apartment. His niece lives upstairs on the 5th floor. He's asleep at night. It's in the middle of the night, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember exactly what time. And he activates his medical life alert. His son had gotten him, the family had gotten him a little life alert in case he had issues because he had a heart condition. At some point during the night, they think that maybe he rolled over in his sleep. He activates it. And when he activated it, there's a little call box that links to the company that provides assistance. And it basically is a big speakerphone, and they ask him, is he all right? Does he need help? They don't get a response, so they immediately call the authorities, but they call the authorities and ask for medical help.
Like 911.
Exactly.
Yes.
They call 911 and say, you need to go to this address, medical attention is required. So the police officers knew that they were going there for a medical emergency. The officers arrive. By this time, Kenneth Chamberlain is awake and alert, on foot in his apartment. He's speaking to the company through the speakerphone system and telling them, I'm all right, I don't need help, please leave me alone, I'm okay. The officers won't leave. They keep urging him to open the door so that presumably, and they keep saying, they can see that he's all right. He cracks the door at one point, and interestingly enough, all these cases, there's video. So there is video of Kenneth Chamberlain cracking open the door. And before the video surfaced, the local newspapers said that he was attacking the officers with a machete or a butcher knife.
Oh, my God.
And the man, he opened his door. The officers can see him clearly that he's standing, but they don't leave. They ultimately take his door off of the hinges.
Wow.
There are racial epithets that the officers use. They're all Caucasian. I can't tell you how many officers were there because in the video it looks like a lot came. They get into the apartment. They give no verbal commands. You don't hear anything like, hey, get on the ground, put your hands up, none of that. They tase him. It appears that one of the electrodes from the taser doesn't, connect onto his body. So there are reports that they then shoot him with a rifle with beanbag bullets. And ultimately, an officer pulls out his firearm and shoots Kenneth Chamberlain to death.
Wow.
In his
How
apartment.
old?
68 years old.
Can you believe that they murdered an old man like
They
that?
tased
At
him.
home.
They shot him with a
In his
beanbag,
own home.
and they shot and killed him. That is.
And where's the medical attention? I mean, it doesn't even seem like the officer should be there. It seems like it should be 911. I mean, it should be the EMS and finding out there's nothing wrong and saying, okay, thank you, and leaving.
Absolutely. And his niece, who lived upstairs, by this time had come down, but they completely disregarded her. You would think with some training and some education, they would try to ascertain his medical condition before shooting him. And so I thought this was a good example for Jonathan Ferrell, because a man has just been in an accident. We kind of talked about this earlier. With training, with education, with confidence and emotional stability, you would think the officers would try to ascertain his condition.
Well, the right kind of
and he's
training.
unarmed.
It's the right kind of training, because they get trained. It's just kind of like we were saying with the passing of the torch. They get trained by an older officer who was trained by an older officer who was trained by an older officer, and this torch of bad habits gets passed down, and we need more good officers who are passing down good training.
Well, what we need to do, since we're city, we fund cities and counties as citizens, we need to demand that they fire people with bad judgment, because we cannot afford for another person to get murdered. So I want these people to have murder charges, but if they don't want to do that, then they should fire them. I mean, every other job, there's accountability.
Right.
And if you don't follow the rules, and if you use bad judgment, you get fired. And the ultimate sacrifice in someone is to be murdered.
Right.
And you're a taxpayer citizen. This man is 68. He's paid his taxes for at least 65 years. And now you get murdered by these people. And that's what we need to deal with. And we don't have much time. And Equator, we haven't had you to say very much. So join in, please.
The thing about these three examples, Mr. Chamberlain is the most, I think, the egregious out of them all. He's 68 years old. He's in his own house. He served his country, as she has said. I mean, he's went to Vietnam. Everyone knows that Vietnam, we never should have been over there in the first place.
And it messed up all our young men because they gave them drugs when they went there. So they all came back on dope.
Everybody came back on dope. They sprayed Agent Orange, so they were sick. I mean, he's in his own apartment. I thought that a man, as the Constitution says, has a right in his own castle. Not to have police intrusion.
And there's no emergency like someone's intruding on him. That's what's so egregious to me. I agree with you, Equator. I mean, no one's saying that he was harmed or someone was there to harm him. They're messing with a man in his own house.
In his own home, in his own castle. The Constitution is supposed to protect a man in his castle. Everyone here wants to be protected in their home. They don't want unauthorized police intrusion on their home. The Fourth Amendment says that we have a protection in our home. Mr. Chamberlain, whether it's his apartment, whether it's anything, is in his home. He had a medical problem, as the 911 call says. But for them to come in to tase him, to shoot him with beanbags, and to eventually shoot and take his life over, even if he was incorporated.
Right.
He's in his house.
Get out of my house. I hate y'all. I don't need y'all.
He's in his house.
You don't have a right to shoot someone or to use violence. And I think at a minimum, whenever these officers do that, our officials should have the maturity and the wisdom and the courage to fire these people. I mean, I just think it's enough jobs to go around, and this ain't the job for you. I mean, we don't want people like that to use bad decisions.
Right. And to add insult to injury, in Kenneth Chamberlain's case, it was months before the district attorney's office or the police would release the officers' names. So those people continued on active duty in the streets.
So they
with what
continue to serve.
training, there was no grand jury indictment for a
So,
long time.
and we know police officers, they were probably sitting around laughing at what they did and being just real nasty about it. Let me ask you this. Was anyone charged in this case?
This case was from November 2012, and the last that I had seen, there were several attorneys working on the case. There was a civil suit in place, and the grand jury had not indicted.
And what about the video? How did that surface?
Yeah.
It was a video. Apparently, the White Plains, the police in White Plains, New York, they have some kind of video mechanism attached to the taser. So whenever you pull out a taser, it starts recording.
Wow.
So that's how they were able to get the video footage from, and it was completely lucky that they did, because all of the reports up to the time the video were released were completely in contradiction. They were calling Mr. Chamberlain mentally unstable, that he attacked police, that he was wielding a machete. I mean, it was very interesting to see the lengths at which they had doctored the story, and then to see the video.
Well, Vivian, one of the things I think we've talked about as a training, this is the training they are receiving. It's the militarization of police.
Right.
It's the war on drugs. It's the war on crime. It's the fact that when a soldier goes to war, we tell them, do what you have to do to go home, to come home.
Right.
What you got to do to come home, you got to do to come home. We're not going to judge you for that. Just come home. And so we train the officers, hey, you're out there on the street, it's you against them. Mm-hmm. It's you against them, and you're fighting for us. You're at war. And so we create in them an idea, a mentality that they have to be a soldier and do what soldiers do, as opposed to a police officer, which is more of a protect and serve, which is more of a listen and gathering and come to force last, and a soldier come to force first. We're not training them to be that way. I think when you have officers equipped with multiple guns and multiple tasers and shotguns, and you give them a utility belt with nothing but weapons, they're gonna use it. Mm-hmm. You spend all your time teaching them how to affect the rest and how to use these weapons, and not necessarily how to take the other approach, which is listen, care, stop, use your reasoning. You just teach them how to fight and defend yourself, and this is what you get. So
that's
I
a
think
very
they are
good
getting
point.
training.
That's a very good point, Damon. That's a very good point.
At.
I hate that it's like that too, because in Mr. Chamberlain's case, at a minimum, they know it's a medical emergency.
Right.
There is no 911 call that says that there's an intruder, that there's a gun, that there's a weapon. So they should come more as an emergency response team. What do you think, Billy?
Absolutely. I agree with Damon, too. I think we can talk about the weapons and all that all we want, but let's talk about the mentality that they have.
Right. But the weapons add to that, don't you think?
Right, of
when
course.
When you get grenades and armored vehicles and helicopters and drones, you start sounding more like the United States Army and the Marines than, the Protect and Serve Community Law Enforcement Agency. I know we don't live in Mayberry, but you've got Andy Griffin, who didn't carry a gun, and you got Barney Fife, who was armed to the teeth at that time. And look, that's a bad example because it's not real. But when you give cops a bunch of things they want to go play with,
It's true.
It's interesting because excessive force and aggression by authority is not unique to the United States. There are examples of officers using excessive and deadly force globally. But I think the reason I picked these three examples is because there is something unique going on here, unique to the United States, and I think that's the issue of race.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because in all three of these examples, you have Caucasian officers and African American victims who, and they're all male. I think so. Gender is clearly playing a role as well. But I think that's unique to the United States. And I think that when we're talking about weapons and when we're talking about training, to me, and this is just my personal opinion, there's one common denominator in these examples, and it's fear, ignorance, and lack of training. Because you're either afraid or you don't understand the situation that's happening when you use that kind of force.
Right.
And my question is, why are we putting people on the street with these kinds of weapons that are afraid and or cannot have the skills to ascertain in an educated way what is going on? And that, I think, is a problem. And I think it's happening in many states.
And it goes back to, like you've said, all along, we vote for our sheriff and we vote for our mayor who appoints our chief of police. So if people vote informed, we may have some ways to change that. It's the only way we're going to change it.
The only thing we're going to do is have to talk about it. We have to ask our viewers who listen to ask your city council people, ask your mayors. This is their year. They will be elected in November. So a lot of times when you go to those forums or you see them on TV shows, people are asking the same old questions, but no one ever asked the hard questions. Mm-hmm. If you have a police chief, are you going to make them enforce the laws to black and white communities? Are you going to make them be stop? If you stop black kids and white kids, are you going to search their cars the same? I think that's what black citizens should be asking. Are you going to train them to deal with mentally ill? Because we always have someone mentally ill in Houston that gets killed unnecessarily. But I see we have another phone call, and we're about to wrap it up. Caller, you're on. Thank you for calling.
Hi there. I'm Vicky Rogers. I listened at your note tonight, and if the niece stayed upstairs, it wouldn't take but 1 second for them to call their niece and say, we have a problem with your uncle down there. Why couldn't they use their common sense to talk to their niece if they got family members on there? It wouldn't take them but a few seconds to get someone in family to get a control of him.
Absolutely. Well, I agree with you, but usually when it's my experience when police officers see anybody approaching, they tell them to stand back, or I'm going to arrest you for interference with the duties of a police officer.
Absolutely.
So they don't let anybody get close. And part of that is good because someone could come up on them and shoot them. But they should, if it's 6 or 7 officers and 1 female that comes up and say, "That's my uncle, he's ill," we bought him a life alert, because if his kids bought him a life alert, then everybody in his family knows he's ill, and he's disoriented, and might have some mental issues.
Yes.
It might not have just been physical; it might have been mental. And we know those ex-Vietnam vets; they are shell shocked till they die. So you don't know how he was feeling, but the issue was, they could have left. They didn't even have to go inside at all and deal with him. Once that life alert surely called and said he was okay.
Correct.
So I agree with you, ma'am, and I appreciate your call.
Well, you take care of your own self up there. We're doing a good job. I call you every now and then.
I know you do. Thank you. And tell all the young people in your family to make sure they're registered to vote and have valid ID, and that they vote, because the young people can change things. I know you vote. I know you vote, Miss Vicki. But it's your children and grandchildren and your neighbors' kids that don't vote, and we need to get them out involved, okay? And you educate them like we're trying to do you, okay?
I sure will.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Bye-bye, darling.
All right, bye-bye. We have 3 minutes. Who wants to do some wrap-ups? Let's start with Equator, since she hadn't had much to say. So you want to say something before we leave? I'll let everybody say something until he just takes us off the air. But
Well, the thing of it is, I wanted to wrap up on the case in dealing with Farrell and the 2 examples that she given as far as Grant and Chamberlain. I really think that it's actually fear, ignorance, lack of training, and maybe some racist ignorance. Instead of just the word ignorance, there's some racist ignorance. Because if that was my case, if these were young white males, the same thing would not happen. Some of the officers they shouldn't be on the force if they have a fear or if they have a racist ignorance. But we have some in Houston that has the same ignorance. We have some in Sugar Land and Fort Bend County that have the same things. So my thing is, how are we going to stop this? When are we going to stop this? Is the police chief, is McCullen able to stop this in Harris County? Nope. Is the sheriff officer, Adrian Garcia? Because there are some officers who's been on their force way before McCullen that he cannot get off. McClellan, way before Adrian Garcia, that he cannot get off, that still have those same racist values. The thing of it is when the public starts to change and starts to see this, that's when that change will happen.
I appreciate that. Justin, what are your closing remarks?
Well, I do think that racial ignorance is a big factor in a lot of these, and I was trying to look through my notes to find some of the descriptions that the woman whose door was being knocked on, that she gave the police, because it was completely informed by things that kind of invoke stereotypes of young black men. I think she was describing he was muscular and he was large and all these things, and he was pounding on the door. And I think that race informs things a lot more than people want to admit, and mostly than white people want to admit.
Right. And white people get mad at black people for telling the truth about it.
Right.
And what frustrates me about the white media, and I'm sorry we're running out of time because we can all come back. What frustrates me is we, as black Americans, we listen to white media all day. I mean, the media is white, okay? And so if you hear Al Sharpton say something, you're pissed off, but he's saying something, because, sometimes and it sounds bad, but you might just get tired of hearing what white people are thinking, because you just have to turn the TV off. And see, that's why so many urban people don't listen to the news. It's like we live in that world, and it's not our world.
Right.
Because you're thinking something bad about me, and I'm not bad. Right. I'll hate myself if I listen to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so I can't listen to that all the time. And so that's why we have to all talk and try to come together and figure out how to live in this world together. But we got to wrap it up now. And we will be back next month and have a roundtable discussion about current events. Thank you all for sacrificing your time.
Thank you.
And trying to educate my 2,000 or 3,000 listeners. And we'll have it on YouTube. And remind people to watch this. And thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. Remember, I want to tell your story. The credits will roll, and you'll have my number, or you can always Google me. Call my office. I'm in court all day, but I'll call you back. All right? Thank you. Thank you for tuning in again. Tonight we have something really good, a hot topic in the news this week. He's been charged with crime. This is a show where I try to educate